Hello, everyone. My name is Gitika Gorthy, and today I'm very, very excited and honored to be interviewing a very special space champion, Mr. Daniel Fox. Mr. Fox is an artist, author, photographer, philosopher, explorer, and entrepreneur. Mr. Fox is a space sciences communicator and has his own podcast series and platform where he writes about all topics related to aerospace. Mr. Fox's dedication to reaching out to a wide audience and drive to elevate the human species using nature as a framework for personal and collective transformation is incredibly exciting. I have actually never interviewed someone who thinks in this sort of thought process. I'm very excited to see what got him into space and what excites him about the future of the industry. I also met Mr. Fox at the Humans to Mars Summit and then the ISDC conference, so very excited to reconnect. Welcome, Mr. Fox. Thank you so much for taking your time to inspire the next generation.
Well, it's an honor to be on your podcast with you. You're like the next generation inspiring the future generation. So the honor is mine.
Thank you so much. And before we get into understanding like more of your background, could you first tell us a little bit about your daily, how your day usually goes? I know there usually isn't a typical day, but what do you usually do in a day?
My wife would say that I'm extremely disciplined with my routine. So I usually, even if I go to bed quite late, I usually get up at 6. My natural rhythm gets me up at 6 o'clock. And then usually I'll go and work out a little bit, and then I drink. I lived in South America in Buenos Aires, in Argentina for 3 years. And one of the things that I came back with was the ritual of the yerba mate. So it's a loose leaf tea that you drink through what we call a bombilla. So it's a straw that has like a little filter at the bottom. So in the morning, I pour myself about 2 liters of water, and I got my gourd with like some loose leaf tea, and I drink that while I catch up on my reading and doing a little bit of emails. So that's my time. That is my moment to me before the day starts. And then usually just go to work. I'm not someone who's able to work out later in the day. I need to get that out of the way in the morning. So the morning is my little space, and then after that, the world can have me.
Yeah, I'm so glad you make that time to just peacefully have some alone time for yourself. I think it's so important to take care of ourselves first. And I can hear some nature sounds in the background. Are you actually outside?
Yeah, I actually stepped out on the porch because the day is beautiful and it's quiet. Usually sometimes I'm working on the yard, but today it's just the birds. So you get the little hummingbird passing by, and you get this little flycatcher that passes by. So yes.
Yeah, it's very nice. And I think it's very fitting for when we talk about what got you intrigued. So thank you so much. And, my next question for you is, could you share a little bit more about your podcast and the work that you're doing? I always see the different articles that come up on LinkedIn and the videos. So I'm curious, can you tell us the inspiration behind founding your own podcast series?
Yeah, so I mean, well, I guess it'll tie into what we're going to be talking, but for 15 years, I wrote about our relationship, about the human journey using nature as a framework for personal transformation. All that I tried to did in that time in my career was about to redefine the human narrative, understanding how life works, and now that I moved into the space, I'm using my storytelling skills, but within the space community, trying to tell a bigger story with space. So I'm using the written word, obviously, with my stories. I wrote, there's one piece of article that's a little bit famous. It's called A Letter from the Earth in support of space exploration. And it talks as if, not that I want to personify the planet, but from the perspective of the planet that works on a total different scale and has also its journey, its arc of living. What is it looking for? And so I write a lot of stories, and then after that I go back into the interviews. I've always been known to be able to connect with people, to reach out to personalities or individuals that often are in different realms. So I started to just dive into the video podcast, even though I don't like to hear myself on the video like a lot of people. But I went for it, and I interview people, and I interview people that are connected within space. But my goal is just to talk, to really bring out the human story of my guests, so that people can resonate with them without necessarily having to do about space. So it comes out twice a week at the newsletter, and then it's going to get, right now, I mean, my major platform is LinkedIn, but we're working on making a website just for it, and making it available on all the podcast platforms.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I'm so glad that you're focusing on the human side and more of the realistic experiences that an individual has. That's something that I love to do as well, because a lot of times we can look at someone's resume or CV, and think, oh, wow, they're so accomplished. They got this because they're geniuses. But a lot of times they've had similar stories just as us. So I think just hearing that sometimes can provide a newfound confidence. And I think that's so important. So I'm glad you're doing that. And I have
Thank
to
you.
ask the question, what
Yeah.
got you into the space realm? Because you're very focused on nature, which is so important, but you connected it with space. And space connects a lot with nature. A lot of people don't look at it that way. They look at it, we're spending and wasting money for, some exploration of aliens, but it's a lot more than that. And so I'm curious, could you kind of dig deeper into this journey of how you kind of combined these two areas together?
Yeah, so it's funny because for me, what really my fascination and my passion has always been about the human story. It's just that before I used the nature to tell that story, I don't see the human species as separated or different than nature. Nature is this giant entity where we live in. I mean, wilderness is a place, is a place where we go, and we understand that it's a place where the human impact is absent or less. But nature is everything. It's the trees, it's the air that I breathe in, it's me as a person, it's the house that I build, that we build.
Yeah.
It's nature is a much more, for me, I don't make a difference between nature and life. They're the same. Um, and we can go back about that. So it's just that before I used the wilderness as my studio. I consider myself an artist, and then I would go out and I would seek that solitude, that place where I
Yeah.
had to kind of face the silence and listen to my thoughts, deal with my demons, my insecurities. But through that process, I would get to create. There was always this moment where I would have this aha moment. I would
Yeah.
receive something from somewhere, a story, an insight. And then after that, I would want to, at that moment, I would be like, okay, now I want to go back and I want to craft the story. I want to share the photos.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
nature was more of a setting to tell the story. The photos were tools, the videos, the writing were all tools. And what happened in 2020, like among a lot of us, and thanks to Elon Musk and all the incredible people that worked on it, is space did not become space did not stay this realistic science fiction idea. It really became, wait a second, this is this is real, this is happening, we have the capacity. And I had this aha moment, realizing that we were about to do something that we've been doing ever since life started on Earth. It's been constantly pushing and pushing the boundaries, and always trying to figure out how to get to that next destination. It's
Mhm.
just that
Mhm.
now, it's hard to grasp what it means to get off the planet. But what we're doing right now, it's nothing different than when we came down from the trees, or when the fish, somehow managed to come out of the ocean, or when the single cells managed to become multi-cells, and so forth and so forth. And so the risks are always kind of, they're in relation to where you are today. And obviously that next step is really challenging for us, um, as much as crossing the oceans or crossing the mountain was challenging at that time, with the tools and the realities that they had to deal with. So be, besides the science and the technology, which obviously we're going to benefit and it's going to elevate the consciousness and the awareness, and I mean, we can talk about all this, but beyond all that, there's a life story, there's a human story, and from the perspective of the planet, of life, it's been waiting 4.6 billion years for this moment. It's been evolving and constantly adapting, trying trials and errors, having things that worked for a while but didn't work, and then having to scrap and start from, from the beginning. For this, for life to go beyond the planet and connect on a universal level in the same way that it's been connecting on the planet. I don't believe that the nature of the universe is different than the nature on Earth. So if life wants to connect on the planet, it wants to connect on a universal level. And here's this planet that has knowledge, that has life. And it would be a total waste of resources and investment if it stayed on that little tiny little molecule of the universe, right? It
Yeah.
wants to reach out, and it wants to connect to these other little molecules of life that are spread across the universe. And we are, in our case, on this planet, the first species ever to have the capacity to fulfill that mission. So when I realized that, I was like, I'm an explorer. I'm always looking for these. I love these places of exploration.
Mhm.
So I've done the wilderness for 15 years, and now I want to tell the story, the human story, but using space as now my new backdrop, and uniting and really trying to elevate the conversation. So in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, that's such unique perspective. Some of the points that you were mentioning about how exploration has been since like the beginning of humankind and even before, and those like crazy ideas of this single cell becoming, humans or even other animals, multi-cells. I think just like that idea of constantly pushing the limits of nature is something that I never processed or at least internalized or really put thought into. So I think it was just really cool to hear that, and like actually internalize that, information. It's really interesting, and I can definitely see how space will be that perfect backdrop. And I remember during the conference, one of the last panel was like 6 or 7 people at the end of the Humans to Mars Summit, and you said something that really I thought was powerful around the importance of social media and communication with others, because you're bringing in this new perspective about nature, about philosophy, sort of ideology. And a lot of people view space as more of this heavy math, heavy physics, heavy science, but there could be a lot more other aspects to the industry. And you talk about how it's so important to communicate and to reach out. So could you share a little bit more about why you think it's important for every single person to be involved in space exploration?
Well, it's our future, right? It's I mean, we can go back, let's say, in the 1900s. I wasn't born, you weren't born, a lot of people, were not born, but we can go back, and we can look into what happened during that time. So what happened was you had Edison and you had Tesla and you had the Wright brothers. The Wright brothers, took the sky. Tesla and Edison were trying to power the world
Yeah.
and really trying to shape a future that so many people had no idea what they were talking about. And you can go back into that era and understand that there were a lot of issues. There were a lot of diseases. There was a lot of societal problems. There was a lot of things where one could say, it's like, how ridiculous are you to try to fly or try to power the world?
Yeah.
Like, no, you should become a doctor, or you should become a teacher. You should become, there's no point of doing that. But what they did is they created a world that was seemed to be impossible, but that new world took care of a lot of issues. It created a new reality that made life better for everyone. I mean, I don't think that there's anyone who would want to go back in the 1900s and live like it was. There's a new world that we live in today. It's not perfect, and it will never be perfect, but there are benefits that we have, whether it's the health or the capacity to communicate, or all the technologies, yeah, there are always some pros and cons for every new technology, but I think that overall, no one wants to go back in time and live the way. Well, usually what I hear is that people would want to go back in time with all the benefits that they have today, which you can't do
Yeah.
that. But
Yeah.
space is that next place where there's two things that are going to happen. If we go back into the European migration when we took the oceans and then we came to America, what America represented, what this was, this new land of opportunity. We've been living in Europe and all these places where
Mhm.
the system had become too big to change. And it was hard to, even though we believed in certain values, it was hard to step out of that big machine. So
Yeah.
people were willing to risk everything for this new opportunity and to come to America to start fresh and anew with this vision of the future. And if anyone has the chance to go to Washington D.C. and visit the National Archives, you really get to understand what this represented, the effort and the energy that they did, that they put in creating that vision of the future, where it would be the I mean, everything is in relative to a time and the reality of their era. But we know what America stands for. That's why there's so many people from around the world that come and risk everything to come to this place. Now,
Yeah.
space is going to be that new place. Space is going to be that place where people are willing to risk to go to, because it's that new land of opportunity, that place where we can step out of this new big machine, because now America now is this new big machine and it's hard to change things, and to start anew with these visions of unity, of corporate collaboration, of working together as we move forward.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that is that opportunity, that cultural opportunity that's offering us. Now the other big benefit that it's going to have is that science and technology, that just this is, we're pushing ourselves and we're like
Yeah.
stepping into a new era, that all these, I've written about how space is going to create a revolution in recycling and the way that we deal with our
That's true.
our all our stuff. Why? Because in space, there's a tremendous, super big, massive incentive to recycle. You cannot waste. The idea of just opening the door and just throwing your garbage, that is the most ridiculous thing that you can do, because that atom of carbon that you have that's been transformed, whether it's food or whether it's material, that atom of carbon is like more precious than anything else. So you're going to have to figure out how to reuse it over and over and over again in different things. Well, all these technologies are going to trickle down back to Earth. So
Exactly.
everything about going to space is for the benefit of the Earth. There's no, it's undeniable. It's just going to elevate everything and going to lessen the stress of extraction on the planet. We can talk about mining and getting resources from other places, but it's just going to be in support of the planet, for the benefit of the planet. And so that's one of the reasons why everybody needs to be inspired about it. It's not the future of space, it's the future of humankind in outer space and beyond Earth, for the benefit of the planet.
I can definitely see how incredibly passionate you are about the specific intersection on the benefits of what it brings down to earth. And I'm so glad you mentioned those points, especially the first one where you were talking about space being like America, like back then in like, during early immigration times, and being this new frontier, a new space where nothing has really happened so far in terms of colonization, just a new chance, a new way to like start something and to build a better system, things we regret from our current world. And so I definitely have never thought of it like that again. It's just a new way to think about it. And I think it will motivate people to explore space. And the second point that you mentioned is, I think it's like a popular theme amongst everyone in the aerospace industry, what they love to say, but it's something that I think the common public needs to really, internalize, of how NASA has a very, very small budget and in the whole government spending. And I think most people know that, but still they think those billions are a waste of money. But just understanding that basic technology, like we're able to talk today because of space technology, GPS, solar panels, all the technology we use in our daily life to improve Earth, to monitor Earth, is all from space technology. So I think just knowing that space provides us this place to innovate and create without any pressure and pushes our bounds of what we can imagine is amazing. I was watching this, I was part on ISDC, there was this talk, you might have walked in, between Star Trek, science fiction versus reality, and how many parts of Star Trek became a reality now, and how we kept pushing bounds of fiction, which is so exciting. I can't imagine what's going to happen in the next 20 years.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, when we imagine the future, often we imagine pieces that we think are going to happen, but then we forget the future as a whole. Like, does it make sense? I was looking at the new episode of Obi-Wan Kenobi came out today, and you see, they have the capacity to travel across the space, but then their clothes is like archaic and like totally unrelated, and the way they feed themselves is almost like kind of there's it's as if like it hasn't evolved. Like it evolves in certain places, but it doesn't evolve in other places. And that's, it's because we always, I was moderating, I think you were there, maybe, no, you were not there, at Space Tourism Conference. I was moderating this panel, and I started by asking people to bring themselves back 300 years ago. And I said 300 years ago is really not that far away. It's only 3 lifetime ago, because now we can live for 100 years, right? It's not 3 generations, it's 3 lifetimes ago. So 3 lifetimes ago, I said, what would it have taken for you to come to this conference? Now, 300 years ago, the steam engine was not invented. The telegram was about 76 years, ahead. The first vaccine was 80 years, I think, or something. We're just like moving by, with horses and by foot, sailboats. So if you'd ask these people, try to imagine the future, what they imagine is like, well, things move, like more horses or whatever it is. But you cannot, I mean, you might think of something that flies, but you would not think of, these little devices that allows us to communicate, or the medicines, all that kind of stuff. The future is like rises as a whole, not just like the specific, like we're not inventing a rocket, but we don't have anything else. It's all these little different technologies. So moving, like if we move in 300 years from now, what is going to be the future like? I have no idea what it's going to be like. I just know that there's going to be a bunch of things that we have no idea how. But here's this one thing that I really want your audience to know. We're not this dumb species that just lets the world evolve and we don't have a power into it. The reason why we're about to be 8 billion on the planet is because we have a tremendous capacity to shape our future. Yes, it's messy, we make mistakes, because mistakes is part of learning, but we figure our way forward. And I do not believe in this gloom and doom future where suddenly the machines are going to take over and then we're just going to be reduced to slaves. I mean, it makes great movies, but I don't think that's the reality.
Yeah, and I think, what you were saying about just like the space industry and how we cannot, or not even just space, but the world in general, we cannot imagine in the next 300 years is a great point. I mean, I never thought about what people 300 years ago would say if they came into our world today. Like, what would they think? Like, they would be confused and I think shocked at like, what is all of this and how did it happen? So I think definitely we cannot even imagine what's going to happen in the next 300 years or even just the next 100 years, because we've just been rapidly really just growing, and even the jobs of tomorrow, we don't even know what they are. So I think in the next, 20, 30 years, there might be jobs we have never heard of today. Yeah. And my next question for you is, have you always imagined yourself kind of pursuing this particular passion and particular route, or was this something that developed over time? And during this process, did you have any obstacles? And if so, how were you able to overcome them?
So about my time with Feel the Wild in the wilderness or space right now? Just want to make sure.
Yeah, space. I mean, you can talk about both because I'm curious if this space was always something you were interested in ever since you were young, or did it kind of come in with nature? I mean, was nature something you're always intrigued by as a young kid?
No, to be honest, I never thought that. I was never like a space geek. Like
Yeah.
I was more of a. I enjoy science fiction, but for me, it was always just a realm of totally unrelated or disconnected. That was not. Most of my relationship with space was actually the opposite of even the technology. I thought like there's a part of the human species
Mhm.
that needs to find a certain humility and perspective in life. I think that we do have a certain God complex at some time that we have to bring ourselves back. So a lot of the writing that I did before and a lot of the stories that I told was about, not let's try not to count too much on technology before we seek or before we experience that humility. Nature is something that is bigger than us. It's an
Mhm.
exercise of perspective and humility. And when you go out into nature, you realize that, we have a certain control, but not that much. And because I saw the scarcity and the limit of the planet, and never thinking that we would have the capacity to go beyond. So the approach back then was, well, if we're limited to this planet, then we have to figure out how to bring ourselves back a little bit, and how to change our idea of growth, not this linear growth at all expenses, because we will hit the wall, and it's gonna be hard when we hit that wall. Um, so my pivot really became in 2020, when the space and the nature really connected the dots. And when it comes to my relationship with nature and wilderness, yeah, that goes back to a long time ago where I moved a lot, and it's part of my story where, by the age of 12, I had moved already, 10 times. And
Oh,
so I
wow.
had to constantly reinvent my environment. And the
Yeah,
only constant in all these moves were,
was me.
there was always a local forest, a local park, or a shore by the river, by the lake. And that became my
Awesome.
source of sanity. That became my world where I could go back and find the tribe and look at it. And wilderness, my time in nature, really taught me how to be a good person, how life worked, to see the reciprocity, the connection, but also the disruptions, the tension, the creation, the destruction. Nature is this, nature and life and us too. If you look at the macro, if you look from a holistic perspective, it seems to be in harmony. Like, oh, you look at the forest and everything is like, peaceful. But if you really look into, the micro, it's harsh. It's every single species is competing for resources, and nature
Yeah,
is not. It's not this place where everything is perfect and there's a balance in long term,
yeah,
but it's rough. There's a reason why we live in city, because it's tough to live out there at the
yeah,
at the mercy of the elements. So,
yeah.
but there's these laws, and there's a foundation that, if you understand their purpose, then you understand a little bit more about your own journey and about these journey of transformation. Nature, life doesn't want the status quo. It doesn't want perfection. It doesn't want tranquility. It wants life to evolve. And how do you make sure that life evolves? to make sure that there's nothing stable, that there's constant movement, that things are being pushed forward. And if you look at every single species on Earth, trees, fungi, mammals, birds, reptiles, plankton, anything that lives and exists on life, every single species has the capacity to destroy their environment. And left to their own devices, every species will destroy the environment, because every species is kind of programmed to do two things. We eat, we procreate until we hit the boundary, and then we have to figure out to move forward. It's just that the human species has been successful at building beyond those boundaries. We've when we were nomadic, we were more at the mercy of these changes. We had to follow food, we had to avoid the weather. And then at one point we started to be sedentary, we started to cultivate, and we started to change the environment for our own benefit. But we're the only ones who did that. We're the only species who decide to take control and start to build on that chaos of that randomness and that chaos of nature. When people tell me, it's like, oh no, nature has everything, like, nature gave me everything that I need. I'm like, really? Well, nature didn't give you the roof over your head. Nature, just brought you out, and there's no house that comes with it. There's nothing above your head. And nature just gave you two legs. It didn't give you a car. It didn't give you a bicycle. It didn't give you clothes. But so if you want to go back to nature in that sense, then that's what it is. Just don't have a roof over your head. Don't dress up. Just eat with whatever is found within your environment. And you will realize that there's nothing fun about that lifestyle. And I don't think that anybody wants to go back over there. We want to evolve beyond that. And it's just a question of perspective. And now we're going beyond the planet to get another kind of experience, human experience, and it's going to be at the benefit of the Earth.
Yeah, I can definitely see how, thank you, first of all, for sharing about what got you connected with nature. And I think having that constancy of the wilderness, regardless of the different places you've moved to, I think it's just very touching. And I know I'm very glad you found that kind of safe space almost to just always have that place that's always constant in your life to some extent. So I think that's very sweet. And building off of that, you started looking a little bit more deeper into what nature means and how we can utilize that as like a tool or a backdrop, as you like to say, for something bigger. And I think that's very exciting. You kind of touched on my next question, which was about what excites you about the aerospace industry. I think you really showed it's almost the unpredictability of the future of the industry and all that's to come with it. But I'm curious, what makes you nervous for the future of the aerospace industry?
Not much, to be honest. To be honest,
very optimistic.
It's not. There are dangers. It's if you ask me, like, what worries me about in 5 years, there's going to be tremendous challenges that we're going to have. Most likely there are going to be accidents. But if we look back into our history as a people, not just as a society, but as the people on Earth, I think that we are the best in the challenging times. This is when we reassess how we want to move forward. When we're too comfortable, we become too arrogant. When we have these milestones to achieve, this is when, like, we achieve the most amazing feats of humanity, but also in science and engineering. Look at James Webb, like decades of cooperation between multi countries, doing things that just blow your mind, when you think about it. So you were asking me is like, what drives me, what I love about the space community or the future community is that there's a desire to move forward with acquired wisdom. We want to use the past. We don't want to deny the past. We don't want to go at the expense of the past. We want to learn. We want to do the best, but moving forward. I come from, I mean, I spent 15 years in the environmental, nature environment, and it's a totally opposite. It's a doom and gloom narrative of like looking into the past and trying to find who's to blame. And I don't like, for me, I'm tired of being told that the human species is a bad species. The human species nature is messy by design, and we have to get over this guilt, shame of like thinking that life is this little perfect thing, and then we have to stop growing. Growth is, undeniable reality of life. But in the space community, there's just this passion. There's really this passion of trying to figure out the solution, and that involves space, and having these like kind of crazy ideas that you would think
Yeah.
that are impossible, and yet you have people, coming up with solution. I was listening to James Green from NASA talking about like creating a force field on Mars, because Mars, the solar winds strip the air, so you have to figure out how to create something that protects the Mars. And he says, like, it's not science fiction. This can, that the theory can happen. Now after that, there's some problem. There's some challenges. But like the thing that someone actually came up with this, with the math and the science to come up with this, is just insane. But now going to space is not going to solve all the problems in the world. There's nothing that solves all the problems in the world. All that it does is that it creates a new reality with their pros and cons, and over time, it's that's another reality of nature, right? Nature is this constant motion between two poles. I mean, you look at, you sit by the water, and you look at the tides. The tides are constantly coming back in and out, and from your perspective, it's pretty. But if you're like a little shrimp, or like whatever, it's on the beach, is this constant destruction, creation, destruction, creation. So going into space will have many, many challenges. First of all, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of different views and different goals. We're going to have to come together. We're going to have to define what it is when we get to the moon. There's going to be resources. Who gets the resources? Who gets the right? It's like logistically, it's going to be extremely complicated. But I believe in our capacity to move and to make mistakes and to fix those mistakes, because there's nothing in the past overall that makes me believe that we don't have the capacity. We make mistakes. I mean, there's no questions about that. But we manage to do something with it, and that's why I'm an extremely realist person, optimistic in the macro sense of things. Like if you pull back, life has been evolving. Like if you look into, since the dinosaurs, there's a trend of life getting more complex and moving. It's undeniable. But obviously, if you get closer to that line, it's a jagged reality. So that's why I'm optimistic about life. Life will figure its way forward. It will find a way. And once we have it, so we do that initial first step of getting off of moving beyond the planet, it will continue there. So that's why I'm optimistic and passionate, and love the space community.
Yeah, I think you were really touching on the point of how mistakes can be like a double-edged sword, where it's like nervousing because everybody in the industry will be kind of like slower, will take a step back, and things may slow down, hopefully not. But also mistakes can be exciting in a way, not the consequences of the mistakes, but rather the discoveries we make off of those mistakes, because nothing ever comes right in a first try. If it does, very lucky, but usually takes a lot of iterations, a lot of like thinking and thought process. And I think that's the whole spirit of engineering. So, yeah. And, now that we're able to learn a little bit more about your journey, your experience, as well as your particular views on the space industry, my last and final question for you to really wrap up the interview is what final piece, and you've given plenty of advice throughout the interview, but what final piece of advice would you give for young students regarding their pursuit of a passion in STEM, aerospace, really just any career, something that you wish someone told you when you were in middle, high school, or early stages of college?
So there's a lot of people. I mean, there's a big emphasis right now. Any big company that you talk to, they're like, we have so much job openings right now. It's insane. It's
Yeah.
like we're hiring left and right, but it's all specific to one area, which is science, technology,
Engineering.
engineering, and math. And now we have, well, and then there's a different conversation about arts. So a lot of people often feel intimidated because they're like, well, I'm not any of those. I'm more into hospitality or architect or something like that. And but the discussion that's happening right now everywhere, and as we move forward, what is going to be necessary, it's the people that are not scientists, that are not about technology, that are not engineering, that are not about math. They're about the human experience. They're going to be about hospitality. They're going to be about art. They're going to be about anything. I mean, I was talking to Patty Stoll, who is the president of ILC Dover Aerospace. They do the NASA suits. I said, so what if someone right now is in Fashion Institute, in New York City, about trying to figure out the things that have nothing to do with space, but they love the idea of where we're going, but they don't see themselves. I said to her, "It's like, is there a place at ILC Dover for people like that?" And she's like, "Absolutely. In fact, like we're looking. We would love to have more people coming
Oh,
because you
perfect.
can, you can teach, the technicality and the engineering aspect of something, but you cannot teach this perspective that comes from from the human experience. Same thing for hospitality. I can't wait to hear about the first hotel chain or hospitality company who is not just, maybe it's too early to invest, but it's going to lead the conversation of what is going to be that human experience into space. So if you are someone who wants or sees a future in that space, in that new frontier, just knock on doors, ask questions, just
Yeah.
start somewhere. I mean, you won't get anywhere unless there's that first initial, you need to open the door first of all, step outside, go into the unknown and see where it's going to take you. And just be confident that you have the tools to figure your way forward, as it happens. Um, you'll never have all the answers, and that's part of life. If you're waiting to have all the answers, you're never going to get anywhere. So don't wait to have all the answers. Just start with a spark. Start with a desire, an intent, a wish. Go and knock on doors, ask questions, and then you see where it goes. There's a certain beauty of the organic growth. There's a direction, but then after that, kind of you kind of open your eyes and wait for what life is gonna bring you. And that, I think, it's one of the places where there's a beauty to life. So go out, start somewhere, and let that like snowball get bigger. And then at one point you'll have enough momentum that like you'll be going to places. But it started with that little snowflakes that just, gets together with others.
Yeah, I think that's really incredible advice because as a, young student myself, I think for me with, no connections to the industry, it was always about putting myself out there in those situations. And I think for every student, just knowing that there's so many opportunities in any industry, if you're interested, you just have to follow that. And aerospace is so interdisciplinary that's what I love to really highlight because your unique interests, you find, ways to bring in nature, you find ways to bring in art, photography, speaking, communications, so many different skill sets that you're strong in into this aerospace industry. You have like a name, you have value that you add to the industry, and it's, comes from a unique background, and that, that shows that you can really have any passion. And if you're interested in space and you believe in the future of humankind going to different planets, you can be a part of the industry. The example you gave about the fashion industry as well in space, I think just knowing how there's so many opportunities, it's all about just finding your way, taking those risks is so important. So thank you so much, Mr. Fox, for giving that incredible advice. I had a wonderful time speaking with you today, and I can't wait to see all that continues to occur, and I hope to see you at a future conference again. So thank you for your time today.
Excellent. It was a pleasure. So until our path cross again, but I'll be looking forward. Next time we'll sit down and have a meal, and because it's the best place to have our stories. It's on the table, over on the table, surrounded by people and sharing a meal. So I'm looking forward to that.
Definitely. Thank you.